Welcome to Pivot Parenting, where we help parents of teens overcome regret and disappointment to find peace and connection in every situation. I'm Heather Fraser, your parenting expert. Journey with me to discover effective parenting tips, improve family relationships, and build a brighter future for your kids. Buckle up, things are about to get better. Hey, welcome to today's episode of Pivot Parenting. I am so excited that you're here. I have a very special guest all the way from Australia, Will Kirsop. He is an educational leader and the founder of Many Roads. This is where he coaches teenagers to discover their purpose and thrive. With a background spanning education, psychology, and business, Will saw a gap in how young people are supported in discovering their unique path. His coaching blends evidence-based methodologies, behavioral and cognitive psychology, appreciative inquiry, and real-world strategy to help teens build confidence and direction for their future. Will has worked with teens from a dozen countries across a broad spectrum, from neurodiverse students to top performers competing on the world stage. Will holds a commerce degree from the University of Sydney and a psychology degree from Swinburne University, where he was awarded the 2024 University Medal at the top of undergraduate student across the entire university. He also completed executive education at UC Berkeley. An avid surfer, meditator, and lifelong learner, he is passionate about leveraging his professional life and experience to help his students navigate purpose, career planning, and well-being. And he just is a really fun, great guy. I know that you're going to love listening to our interview together. And so without further ado, here is Will. Hey, Will, welcome to Pivot Parenting.
Hey, Heather, I'm delighted to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, this is a problem that so many parents are so concerned and dialed in, which
Mhm.
is screen time. We've got video games, we've got social media, we've got computer stuff. Devices are very divisive.
Yeah, they are. They absolutely are. And it's funny because I think one of the things that in my practice and in my work coaching teams that I often find is, and I'll probably refer back to this, they often intuitively know that, the devices are sometimes not enabling the behaviors or helping them do the things they want to do, which is, I think, is always a positive thing to come back to. But often it just comes down to boundaries and things of that nature.
And if we're honest, adults have a hard time with this too.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're the ones modeling it for them, right, as well.
Oh, yeah.
So when we're on our phones or doing something, not paying attention, not being present, that has an impact. And it obviously can start, you see it with toddlers, right, in the playground.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Okay. Device dependence. Let's kind of overview the problem and the implications and impacts. Can you give us a quick rundown of what we're looking at?
Yeah. So I think the one of the biggest things that stands out to me from a data perspective is in 2021, Common Sense Media in the US, uh, I guess, found from their research that the average teenager spends 8 hours and 39 minutes on a device every day, which is mind blowing, right? Because we
Yeah,
expect them generally to be in school.
that's longer than a school day, I would imagine.
Yeah, and obviously there's maybe some overlap there, but when you think about sleep, if you think about waking hours, it's like around half of the waking hours, and that was actually up from 7 hours and 22 minutes in the kind of pre-COVID time. So it's a really, really, it's a large bulk of time. And additionally, from the actual impacts, like a kind of a meta-analysis, so looking at like 27 different studies across this, demonstrated that it impacts, like has negative impacts cognitively, socially, emotionally, physically. So we are up against like big things when it comes to screen time. And this isn't all to be like doom and gloom today. It's to try and think about, technology's enabled a lot of wonderful things in our lives, but how do we have a healthy interaction with it as adults and when we're, I guess, modeling towards teens as well.
Yeah, for listeners familiar with my voice and kind of my take on things, I am not a doom and gloom person. I actually really despise fear-based approaches to problem solving because it
Yeah.
typically doesn't turn out as well. And so I think to look at the scientific stats figures what's going on, calibrate that that's not every child, that's an average, and different studies are going to show different things, and then people are going to interpret those findings differently. So I think that it's really important for parents to note what is actually happening in their household as far as usage and then impact on an individual basis because we have the general, the broad spectrum result base, but then
Yeah.
we've got what's going on in our house.
Yeah, absolutely. Specific to each family and each household. And yeah, some families might get a huge amount of joy about watching a Netflix series together, and that's
Yeah,
awesome. And that like might bring the family together, or it might be sport on a weekend, or the parents might game with the kids. It's different for
exactly.
every family.
Yep. So
I
it's
think
not all bad.
of course, and I think the way that we try and think about it, right, is like what's a skillful or a wholesome kind of interaction with the technology, and when does it become less skillful or less wholesome? And I think we can all agree that we're probably pretty happy we have Google Maps to help drive us places where we've got to go places, right? We're not
Yeah.
wishing we were looking through the book of the old days and trying to go through all
The
those different
atlas.
pages, which exactly.
I
So
don't think our kids would even
yeah.
know that word, an atlas.
Yeah. It was
Okay.
escaping me. I did grow up in that time, but I had to use it. But yeah, I forgot it was called that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there you go.
Okay. You are a little younger than me. Okay. What are some developmental factors that come into teen screen use that
Yeah,
you want parents to know about and be aware of?
yeah. There's probably a number, and maybe we can chunk on them kind of individually. So just maybe to run through them are the things that I think of are like brain development is probably one of them, and they're all intertwined actually. But I think like if we talk about it, probably brain development's one. I like to think about executive function as another one. There's also sleep's another one, and then metacognition, so like thinking or learning how to learn, and that's more around like study and academics. And then there's probably some considerations for like the neurodiverse or ADHD populations. But anyway, stack it all the way back up to brain development. Teenagers are going through two main things. So one, they're going through synaptic pruning, and a kind of easy or a good way to think about it is nerves or neurons that fire together and wire together. So each time that we're going through and doing an activity or having a thought pattern, it's kind of almost creating like a groove. Is a good way to think about it. And at the same time, pruning is happening where those connections that are not being used are actually kind of being removed. And that's natural. We have this
Yep.
overproduction of neurons. It happens to everyone. And then the other side is like the myelination, where there's the electrical signals are kind of becoming faster through the fat that's kind of being like the myelin that's being added to it. So it means that signals can move faster, and that actually happens from like the inside of the brain out. So generally around 14, 15 years of age, their limbic system, so the amygdala is getting, the emotional centers of the brain are getting, I guess, wired or getting myelinated, sorry, quicker at a faster rate than the frontal lobe. So the planning, the organization, some of those higher order skills. So that's probably just like a vehicle to think about it from a brain development standpoint, that if you're a kid and you're watching a quick TikTok, that is going to actually have greater emotional reactivity for you
Can
than
you give us a
than
concrete example of that? I understand what you're saying
yeah,
with the dendrites
yeah,
and the pruning and the
yeah,
myelination, but what does that
yeah.
actually look like?
Sure, sure. So yeah, and sorry to kind of map the science, the theory is, imagine you come home from school and you've got homework to do, and it's something that you're aware you need to do, but you need to have a break, right? So if you possibly go on and watch, say, a quick YouTube short or a TikTok or Snapchat, whichever the thing
Yeah.
may be, that can really, really spike dopamine for a lot of these kids, right? So they're kind of spiked, they're really, I guess, hyper aroused. And that's like creates like a pretty challenging feedback loop, because there's like the instant gratification of spending time on the phone versus the delayed gratification is maybe even a strong word, but the delayed reward
Very
or the
delayed.
delayed feedback of doing your trigonometry homework or whatever the case may be. So that's, I guess, what's happening, and how I see that teens are responding to it. And then we can have conversations around, well, what's the healthy way to think about, it is maybe important for you to have fun on your phone, have fun gaming, do these things, but also tend to your other activities, whether it's creative pursuits, sport, and academics as well.
Okay. How does it impact their sleep if it impacts, and how can we help them get the sleep that they need?
Yeah. So I think sleep's already quite a challenging time
Yeah.
for during adolescence, right? And because their body clock, like their circadian rhythm, shifts back 2 to 3 hours later. And it's tricky because like the school time doesn't really change. And it typically tends to be at a time that, kids are like not really wanting to wake up. So, and there's probably a whole different body of things we can go there. So there's already the biological challenges that teens are facing, but then the behavioral ones actually can make it a little bit challenging. So, for instance, like the blue light on screens and things of that nature kind of suppresses melatonin, making it challenging for them to sleep. So, what I tend to suggest, and some of the conversations that I tend to have with students as well as with families, is let's create like a window before they go to bed, and ideally they can when they're up in the morning when they're just not on their screen. And it's going to be different for everyone. Some people that are tuning in may not have this as a problem, but I tend to find in my practice, like a lot of kids, it's the last thing that they do before they go to sleep is
Yeah.
like looking at their screen, and it's the first thing that they do in the morning. So often they're kind of like there's quite a high level of like overstimulation, hyper arousal before they go to bed. So we can wind that down, ideally for 20 minutes, if not half an hour before they go to bed. I think that that's something that can definitely support them. And because we know that when they get sleep, it helps their growth, so like emotionally, socially, as well as physically and cognitively. So that's definitely one of the tips that I use with a lot of families.
Yeah. And I can hear parents saying that's lovely,
Mhm.
but there's like my kid is not going to do that.
Yeah.
What would you recommend for parents who have less compliant kids when it comes
Yeah.
to all of these factors with their developing brains and bodies and screen use?
Yeah. It's definitely a difficult question. I can imagine, like, there is obviously a lot of pushback. One
Yeah.
thing that I really believe in is actually empowering the teams with like the data and the information.
Hi there. I just want to pause and let you know if you are struggling to make sense of your teen's behaviors, emotions are running wild, and you're looking to turn things around to have the family you dreamed of while rocking them to sleep, I would love to talk to you. I want to give you a special, powerful gift. 30 minutes with me, my friend. You'll walk away with more confidence, clarity, and understanding of what the issue is and your next best step in resolving any situation you bring to me. It's completely free. I love families and want to help yours be wildly happy and successful. Book this call by visiting my website, heatherfraser.com. Remember, Fraser is spelled with a Z-I in the middle. And don't worry, the link is also in the show notes. I look forward to meeting and helping you.
And so we can sit them down and say, like, hey, just so you're aware, like, this is actually the impact that phone use is having. This is the impact that it's having on your sleep. And like informing them, because a lot of the time they, may not necessarily know. Obviously, they're just, excited to be kind of on their phone. And like, for instance, with girls, I think it can be quite powerful, right? Like, girls tend to have more internalizing disorders. And if we look at, how it's been mapped since the use of smartphones, like there is, a 3 times self-harm rate now than before kind of the use of smartphones. So it's actually maybe talking to, in this case, daughters about, well, like this is actually the impact it can have. And the last thing you tend to look at before you go to bed is often something that you think about in your process a lot more. So I tend to empower them with the data and then the information. And then the second side of it, Heather, what I like to do is it's always like a little bit of a negotiation, I actually feel. So it's kind of ask them like, hey, like what do you want? What do you think is fair and reasonable? And they might, say like X, and you just try and bring it back a little bit and you push against the boundaries because inherently they want the boundaries. So they go, okay, well, I can have my phone up until 5 minutes before bed, hypothetically, they might say. And you're like, okay, well, like let's start with that for this week. We'll agree with that. But like next week, I like for me, I think we need to have it 15 minutes and we're going to work towards that. But I'm going to start you with that and I'm going to trust you with that. And so yeah, I think the
Yeah.
three just to
So
name it. Yeah.
education and then cooperation.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good idea. Yeah.
Okay. And I also like to add, and this depends on the child's personality, but sometimes making things like a challenge or a game can be really fun too.
Yeah.
Like, okay, and especially if you join in. So, like, neither of us are going to have our phones in our bedroom, and
Yeah.
we're going to turn them off by, 9 o'clock or 9:30 or whatever. Plug them in the kitchen and then
Yep.
get ready for bed and like chat and do our thing. And how many days in a row do you think we could do that? And like, what could our record be? And like, I don't know. Some kids
Yeah.
like a fun challenge, especially if you're willing to participate
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a tremendous point, and
because
that
it's good
modeling,
for
right?
our sleep too.
Yeah, and like I think that yeah, it's exactly like that. It's like, hey, we're gonna none of us are gonna have it. Like I'm gonna show you this is important to me as well. And if you need to go get alarm clocks,
Yep, that's just what I was
as an
thinking. Get an
example,
old-fashioned alarm clock
yeah,
like the 1900s and see how it
I think
does.
exactly. And I think for any parents tuning in who might have tweens or younger children, possibly is this is actually really relevant for you because you've actually
Yeah.
got all the power in your hands because you actually maybe haven't given them this device so that when you do get the device for the first time, this is where, because they're going to probably be wanting it like nothing
They'll
else.
promise
So,
anything. Yeah.
exactly. So it's like, okay, these are the agreements, these are the parameters. And I would personally suggest codifying them in writing and having like a bit of a discussion around it because you've got like, that's the golden time to kind of have that conversation.
Yeah, right before they
So
get their
that,
first phone. They've
yeah,
been begging for years.
yeah,
Everybody
exactly.
else has one. I'm the
Yeah,
only kid without one.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Right?
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah. So what I hear from parents a lot is they hate how screens impact their child's sleep. They hate how friends for good and bad have all access to their child as far as like drama, friend drama, and
hmm,
bullying, and just a lot. And then social media and games and how it sabotages homework and exercise. But what do you hear from teens? Because
yeah,
I am the one listening to parents, you're the one listening to the kids.
yeah. So I think it's almost similar, but in a different fashion. So you touched on like bullying, for instance, right? Like years ago, you'd kind of get reprieve from
Yep.
3 p.m. till 9 a.m. And now that's just not something that can happen. So, for instance, I was, doing coaching. This is unrelated to bullying, but like in terms of just like group chat and FOMO, maybe a little bit more broadly, is that
Yeah.
I hear from teams that they're like worried about doing blocks of homework because they'll miss out on the group chat and feel excluded the next day, or and then almost be like the butt of jokes because they weren't part of this funny exchange that went on online. And I get it, right? Like that would be really difficult as a teenager when they're forming these points. So and this kind of comes a little bit more to studying, but like what I tend to encourage is there's a technique called the Pomodoro technique where you do 25 minutes of study or homework and then take a 5 minute break. And when I broach that with teens after that, they feel like that's a really healthy balance of going, well, okay, I can miss out on the group chat for 25 minutes. That's not going to ostracize me for the rest of eternity.
Yeah.
But then I get 5 minutes to maybe jump back in, and that's probably an appropriate time. And so that they then have this, view in their mind that they can have their phone out of their room for 25 minutes, have deep focus, and then have a little break. And it's probably not too much different than getting a snack and they, and things of that nature. So that's one thing that I think is really new and really different. And then another one, interestingly, on like more of the gaming side of things is, and it's probably a little bit overlooked in terms of a possible benefit, is there's a lot of like either competition or like cooperation. And there's actually a lot of socializing that goes on during
Yeah.
those times. Probably, particularly playing these like multiplayer games or they're competing against their friends. So sometimes they are actually focused on achievement and outcomes and they're actually working quite hard towards something there as well. So I think that that's something that we don't necessarily want to dismiss from the social benefits and the kind of, learning benefits and working towards something. I think it's just, how do they maybe start doing a little bit more of that in the real world as well?
Balance, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like the dress rehearsal for a real project at work or school or something.
exactly. And when can they? Because every case is a little bit different, as you well know, Heather. But like depending on the teen, like can they do those things? Some of those things sometimes in person, even if they're sitting side by side with their friend and things of that nature. Because we want to be able to have them doing real world experiences when they can.
Yeah. Yeah. And how can we help our kids? What are some practices that you have found to be successful with the teens that you work with in overcoming this desire to always be on a screen?
Yeah. So I usually just try and be pretty inquisitive and be pretty questioning with them. So, and I think like if I can maybe take like a big step back before I go forward in terms of
Yeah.
just for parents who are on the call, like the way my practice and my approach, like it's very heavily centered on purpose and like meaning. And so I will work with teams from the outset, thinking about things like priorities, thinking about things like values. So that's already informed in terms that they might say, like, well, very common are priorities, family and or friends are priorities. It's their hobby that they're interested in, whether it's sport or something creative. So you can just like, then I can have a little bit of a conversation like, hey, it's definitely important to be on your phone or gaming and things of that nature. But what's like the healthy interaction that they can then have with those devices? So I tend to again try and put it on the student, and like they'll often know that maybe they come home from school, they're a little bit tired, they want to have a snack, they might want to use their phone, but it's like, okay, what's an appropriate boundary of how long can you game or how long can you text, and whichever the thing that they want to do is before they start their homework. And then I'll inform them. I'll be like, hey, you know that you're going to watch these videos and or you're going to game and you're going to have these huge spikes in dopamine. Like, do you really think that it's going to make your math homework or writing an English essay really that interesting? And they're going to actually start like thinking about it a little bit, and they're like, oh yeah, it's harder. And then I say, well, imagine if you do that right before bed, you just like gamed for all this time straight, and how are you going to switch off? So again, it goes back to what I said at the start. Like intuitively, a lot of the time they know and they understand that there's like a need for the balance, and it's just like I just believe we're just trying to scaffold them and get them, almost like lead the horse to water a little bit, and have trust in them and have faith in them that they can, work towards managing it in their own way.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you think these parents should be aware of or strategies for them to potentially try before we wrap things up?
Yeah, so I think that like boundaries can be like absolutely definitely a really big thing, and that's going to work like really differently for each family in terms of like their
Mm-hmm.
boundaries and expectations. I think from my standpoint as well, like I always say, like for devices, it's a golden time before bed and right after waking up. So kind of the longer outside of that, obviously there's a limit to it, but if they can get, a buffer each side of sleeping, that can be really helpful. Then I think it also depends on like family interactions, right? So like I've worked with a family, and I think this is like a brilliant thing. The rule is for the teenage son that he's not allowed to be like on his phone in the car when like mum, typically his mum, but like taking him to and from school, and with dad as well. So I think that's like a really good thing because that like forces in that conversation, like, like interaction. And obviously maybe the first time it was a little bit awkward or the kid wants to be on the phone, but it's really nice that they can then like have those kind of conversations and interactions. And maybe it's, the no phones, the dinner table and things like that. So by parents setting like really strong boundaries, that can be something that's really helpful. And I just encourage each family to think about what really works for them, and then to celebrate the times when they want to use devices together, or when, the kids can go watch Netflix, game, spend
Yeah.
time on their phones, things of that nature.
Okay, so parents listening, if you need help maintaining boundaries, talk to me. If you want your kid to stick to their priorities and think long term, and they don't want to listen to you because you're their not as clever parent, which I know that you and I know that you're very clever, but our kids tend to think that we're not the most clever. Will here is has an amazing accent, number one. Number two, he likes to surf and he has long hair and he is a fun time, and he can talk to your teenager about priorities and how to make their values and their goals an everyday practice, which is brilliant. So how can the parent who wants their kid to set their device down a little bit more, how can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Heather. And I think the easiest way to find me is just my website, so manyroads.co. So that's manyroads.co. And anyone can email me directly. So will@manyroads.co. And yeah, I just always love to say, like, to the parents who are tuning in or educators, like, you guys are doing such a brilliant job and just showing up and listening to pivot parenting and all of these things. Like, you're obviously putting in a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of energy. So you're already doing such great things. And it's just really encouraging. So it's a privilege to collaborate with many of you, and yeah, particularly to be here today, Heather.
Yeah, thank you, Will.
My pleasure.